Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Deeran. I'm Director of Enlighten, Scotland's non-partisan independent think tank. Could I ask you to mute yourself if you're not one of our speakers, please, just to avoid any background noise. So welcome to today's discussion, which is about the future of Scotland's colleges, the present and near past and future, I should say. This is a fascinating, if challenging, time for the sector, with rising demand for technical and vocational education, a really national conversation going on about that now. There's a pressing need for skilled workers to join the labour market, and new ways of learning spreading globally. Colleges, as we know, also have a vital role in communities around Scotland, in alleviating poverty and in supplying the skills and training that our employers so badly need. So after real terms cuts to colleges over the past 4 years, the budget announced on the 13th of January in Scottish Parliament proposes a 10% increase in investment for the sector, a boost of £70 million over the next year, which is undoubtedly welcome, although we'll explore what that actually means in practice as part of this conversation. Is it going to be a step change in funding that will allow colleges to take the lead in providing opportunities to learners of all ages and stages of life, or is it a pre-election lollipop? That's something that we can talk about. We've obviously also got an election coming in May, and we're going to explore as well where colleges and skills will sit as part of that debate, and of course in the manifesto process, which is currently underway. So I'm delighted to welcome today's guests. We have Angela Cox, who is chair of the College Principals Group and principal also of Ayrshire College. Welcome to you, Angela. And we have Gavin Donoghue, who is Chief Executive of Colleges Scotland. Now, as ever with these events, they're at their best when you guys in the audience send in your questions or any points you want to make. And if you can use the chat function on Zoom to do that, we'll try and take as many questions as possible for our panel. So that would be great. So I really want to start. It's been a tough few years, and I think maybe just getting an overview of what that's been like for the sector. Gavin, I don't know if you, in your role, want to maybe go first on that and just put us in the picture of what it's really been like for colleges across Scotland.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and afternoon, everybody. So, you know, it's not just the college sector, but Audit Scotland and the Scottish Funding Council have made it very clear that there's been a prolonged period of chronic underfunding in the college sector. At 20% real terms cut over the last 4 years has had real terms consequences. We know from reports in the media that colleges are having to consider campuses and campus closures, and some have campuses that are really not quite fit for the modern education that colleges can and should be delivering to their students. Likewise, we've seen a reduction in around 30,000 students. So 30,000 students who would otherwise have been coming to college and getting the valuable education, technical, vocational, further education, have not been able to do so because of that underinvestment in our college sector. So you've had a real difficulty, and it's meant that college principals have had to take really hard decisions. We've had to have headcount reductions in colleges, losing staff, and it all just perpetuates a kind of declining cycle. So we were glad to see a bit of a step change in the approach in the Scottish Government to the next budget. But again, it doesn't really undo all the damage that's unfortunately been done over the last 4 years.
And Angela, you are one of those principals who's been dealing with the reality of the situation at your institution, as well as the broader role that you have. What's that been like?
It's been difficult, particularly when staff on the front line realise the life-changing opportunities that we provide every day. But the real losers in all of this are our communities and our economy, because colleges are enablers, and we support our economies and our communities to thrive. So it's very difficult when you're not able to do that. And I think one of the challenges we've had is there's a perception that colleges aren't as well understood as the rest of the tertiary sector. And I think that's amplified when you look at the inequality in funding. Our students are the least well funded from the public purse. which makes us feel that there is inequality and a lack of self-esteem in terms of the college sector.
What are some of the decisions that you've had to wrestle with, Angela, over the past few years as you're dealing with, budget cuts and the reality of enforcing them?
So I think it's about reducing courses where perhaps there are small numbers of students, but absolutely critical for community, real sort of foundational courses. The wraparound support that we provide students. Colleges are open door providers. It's very, very rare that we turn people away because they haven't reached an academic level. But what that means is that we provide a whole range of wraparound support, and that's been eroded out of necessity over the last few years. So you can see that people are coming through our door who need high levels of support, and we're not always able to provide that now because we're caught up in a system which is based on input and reaching credit targets rather than outcomes and measured on the sort of longer term impact we have in terms of our community and economic prosperity. So that's been very difficult.
And Gavin, in terms of those students, you mentioned that the fewer students that are being educated as a result of the financial pressures. Where do these people go? I presume that the university might not be an option for some of them. They're obviously looking for skills to be able to get work. So what are the consequences for the people that can't get into college?
I mean, I think that's a real key question, Chris, because sometimes we don't really know. We don't have a unique identifier number for students in this country. So if people are unable to attend a college, it's unclear whether they are able to access another college course or other training provider somewhere else, or they're just lost to the education system in general. And I think that's a real problem because we know that we've got people crying out for college courses on really important economic sectors like engineering, renewable energy and others that are not able to be taken on by colleges. And in fact, we've got colleges like Ayrshire and others that have got waiting lists for people in these really, really economically important courses. So that the answer is we really don't know. But what I've been saying to a lot of people, and I think is absolutely true, is with colleges, often some of the people that are coming to colleges are the furthest away from the labour market. So they are potentially looking at being on benefits or coming into college and getting that skill set that allows them to access perhaps their first job and the first start on their career. So really coming to college gives the Scottish economy and the Exchequer a real double hit because you've got people potentially coming off benefits and then going into work and becoming taxpayers.
Mm. Sorry, Angela.
Can I come in there, Chris?
Yeah, of course.
So I think it's a really interesting point because I think the choices of young people in particular, they're changing and there's a real uptick in demand for college courses. And you look at the levels of inactivity across Scotland in the 16 to 24 category, which is rising exponentially. And at the same time, we've got massive skill shortages across the economy in some of our real sort of key and foundational economy sectors. And I do think there is a correlation between the reduction in college courses and increasing numbers of inactivity amongst young people because they're not able to access the type of provision that perhaps colleges once were able to offer. But secondly, young people are very, very switched on and they know where the jobs are. And jobs are in technical applied areas where they've got hand skills. And they're choosing perhaps to not take other routes. And also we have a cap on apprenticeship places. And there are more people looking for apprenticeships, and there are places. So it's not just about full-time college provision.
And so this process of retrenchment that's taken place over the past 4 years or so, has that kind of run its course now? Have people taken the hard decisions so that they can survive? Or is there still a threat of further retrenchment to come, setting aside what we've got in the budget, which we'll come on to, but have the hard decisions been taken, or is that still a process that's being worked through? And will there be more courses cut? Will there be more mergers or closures or whatever? What's the state of play?
If I come in there first, I mean, I don't think we're out of the worst. This gives us 18 months, 2 years reprieve, really, in terms of the situation that we were in, which was, immediate potential. I'm going to use the word collapse. That sounds very dramatic, but 11 colleges would have run out of cash. So because of the cuts that colleges have had to make over the last few years, there's nowhere else for them to go. And we still exist in a system where funding is over-regulated. It's not agile enough to allow us to flex and be able to do what we would like to do in terms of supporting our communities and the economy. We're over-regulated in terms of ONS classification, and I'm not suggesting we get rid of ONS classification, but the interpretation of that in other UK nations is different. So it would give colleges some flexibility to build their own sort of longer-term financial planning. And there is still this whole thing around equity in terms of what colleges provide and how much we're funded. So the reasons why colleges are finding it so difficult with the current funding allocations has not gone away. So this is a bit of a reprieve, but we still need to do that work to build a long-term sustainable future.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, Chris, I mean, when I go around and visit colleges, they are incredibly effective and efficient organisations, and they're very, very lean, to the point where sometimes the management structures are bordering on skeletal. So there has been a real impact of this lack of funding. I suppose the one ray of light that we've seen is in the discussions around public service reform, and especially in the Cabinet Secretary's evidence to Parliament last week. I think there is a recognition that colleges have done their bit. Colleges have probably went through this process earlier than other parts of the public services. Alongside local authorities, colleges are really the only part of the public sector that's reduced its headcount since devolution quite significantly. So although it has been a very, very painful process, I think colleges are now in a very lean position that they can grow from here. And actually, if there's to be other public service reform and headcount reduction, I think there's an acceptance across government that colleges have absolutely done their bit in that regard.
And Gavin, I mean, this all must have had an impact on morale in the sector. I mean, everyone's human, and you get up and you go to your work and you do your job and you take those hard decisions. But it's not a happy thing to be doing, to be making. None of us want to be making cuts or rejecting people or whatever. So how would you describe morale in the sector?
No, you're absolutely right. I think it has been at quite a low ebb because the cuts outside of colleges' control. It's led to often difficult and fractious relationships with their trade union colleagues, because colleges haven't been able to necessarily kind of match their expectations in pay. Although I would say that staff in colleges are very well paid and have very good terms and conditions, but that has led to that kind of fractious relationship, and then that creates a bit of a vicious cycle where actually if colleges are in industrial disputes, and then the commercial partners that they work with, the big companies that are sending people in for apprenticeships, begin to get a bit nervous about whether those people are going to get their qualifications or not, it kind of leads to this vicious cycle. So I think we are and have been at a pretty low ebb, but again, I'm hoping that this budget, although not in doing all the damage in the past, is us turning a bit of a corner in terms of relationship with colleges and the Scottish Government, and actually as government recognising that not only are colleges these amazing skills engines that provide the skilled workers for the workforce of all these companies, but are actually valued community anchor institutions, and we've seen that recognised through the anti-poverty work that colleges are now going to be funded for.
Yeah, and obviously the budget, as we've been saying, had some good news at last. You've obviously been lobbying pretty hard to get an uplift in funding. When did you have any sort of indication before the budget that actually ministers were starting to think about giving you a bit extra?
Yeah, so I think as an organisation, but also as a broader sector, we really successfully campaigned on this, helped by the fact I think that the evidence and the facts are in our favour when you have Audit Scotland and the Scottish Funding Council showing how bleak the picture was financially, then that certainly helps. I think we knew we were getting a bit of a sympathetic hearing, but obviously pre-budget nobody would give us any hard facts or figures. And then when we began to hear it leaking out just over Christmas, New Year time that colleges were being mentioned positively in terms of the budget discussions, then that began to build a picture in our mind that actually we might get a good result here. And it is a good result, and I think it was the best result we could have reasonably expected in the circumstances. But again, out of the 4 scenarios that we published in advance, it still only just puts us up to the top end of our diminished scenario. So we're not quite at survival, we're not quite at sustainable, but we are moving on from the kind of almost perma-crisis that colleges were in previously.
Mm-hmm. Angela, I was going to ask you about that. What does £70 million extra mean for colleges? As a principle, for example, what you're going to be able to do?
Yeah, it's certainly flat cash. It's certainly better than flat cash. But I guess the devil is in the detail, because within that 70 million is a lot of already committed spend. So colleges aren't thinking, what am I going to do with this 10% increase in money? A lot of that was already baked in to some of the assumptions that we have put in future forecasts. However, there is a little bit of headroom in that. And I would like to think that we would be able to start thinking about that longer term transformation of the sector and individual colleges. But that starts within individual colleges and then regions first. Because colleges have already been through a period of review. We were regionalised in 2010, I think it was. And there's still changes taking place now. So it's building on that foundation work, and it will be interesting to see what happens post-election and whether that sustained funding and recognition of an increase continues.
Yes, that's actually what I was going to ask, because obviously, given there's an election coming, there will be a suspicion that this is buying off a political problem in the short term rather than a genuine change of heart in terms of the medium and long term, and that 26, 27, everything looks better, and then you hit 27, 28, and as we've seen from projections across public service funding from the Fiscal Commission and others, it gets a lot tighter after next year. So, Gavin, how concerned would you be that this is a one-off, as I say, just to buy a political problem away?
I think I'll choose to be optimistic here, Chris, and say that this increase, although for 1 year and it's only annual budgets, does reset the baseline for college funding going forward. So we're not aware of any single packets of funding within this increase in resources. Therefore, we would want to see that continue as the baseline going forward. So to move us on from 656 million to a rebaselining up to 721 is where I would expect, and I think the sector would expect us to be going forward from there on. Because again, this is not, as Angela said, it's not 10% increases across everybody's budgets that they've got free cash to spend. It is recognising there was costs already baked in, whether that's employer national insurance or switching between capital and revenue, and other things that have already been factored into college budgets. So for me, I'll look at it as an optimistic future scenario where that 721 million becomes our baseline going forward, and that we want to see increases on a real terms basis from then onwards.
Angela, what's your take on it?
I'm going to say cautiously optimistic. And I guess if I take a step back, and it's sort of the topic of today, you know, there isn't a huge amount of money within the public sector purse. And colleges do need to have sustainable funding and real terms increases. However, there are other things that we need to change within the sector in order to be sustainable and efficient and continue to deliver to the needs of our communities and economies. So I think it's a combination of all of those things. It's not just about more money.
Mm-hmm. And I understand there's an expectation attached to this money that colleges will transform and reform in return for the extra funding. What does that mean in practice?
Well, it's a difficult one to answer because transformation means different things to different people. For me, this hopefully is an opportunity for individual colleges to invest in their own transformation. The amazing things about colleges is that we're all different. And we all know what it is we need to do to transform and be more agile and responsive to the needs of our regional and national economies and communities. But when you're counting every penny, you can't make those investments that sometimes you need to make in terms of the adoption of new technologies, changing curriculum, being able to apply innovations. So, I mean, it will give us a little more flexibility than we've had before. So I think there is more than enough opportunity and ambition within individual colleges to take that forward. That would be the first and priority, I would say, for any transformation work. Then there is something about how do we better deliver to the needs of our regions, and building on the successful, you know, according to Audit Scotland, different reports, regionalisation was a success. So how do we build on that? It's certainly not mergers, and it's certainly not a vanilla approach to structuring a system in a way that makes sense on paper, but actually doesn't make sense to the communities that we serve.
And I think I would add to that in that, you know, I think the Minister and the Cabinet Secretary have been pretty clear that the increase in college funding served two purposes. One was stabilisation, and the other bit was to provide for a platform for transformation. So without that stabilising effect of this increased funding, colleges would have been still in firefighting mode, still in crisis mode, constantly looking at further staff reductions, looking at further student reductions. So without that rebaselining, we wouldn't have even had the headspace to get into any discussions on reform and transformation. So I think it does allow for a little bit of, you know, a breathing space for colleges to have that discussion with government, but that discussion is still to happen. You know, we're aware the universities have had an announcement around their own structural transformation discussions with the government that was announced in December. Colleges are not quite that far along the path just yet, but we are open to those discussions with government.
And it strikes me as something of an irony that as you've been going through these troubles, the conversation about colleges and the role that they play in our society and in our economy has changed. And it's changed because employers have started talking about it and whether university is really the right path for as many people as are currently going. Parents and students are maybe thinking about the cost of university degrees and actually the outcomes of a good college education and what you might earn at the back of that. So we're thinking a bit differently now about the path through education and into work, and indeed beyond that as well. So could you talk a bit about that, about where colleges sit in that ecosystem?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in there. I mean, I say this quite a lot, but I think the macro argument really is one here. All the employers that we speak to are looking for shorter, sharper skills interventions at the level of education that colleges specialise in providing. So I think the college model is going from strength to strength, and we see that at a UK level as well and internationally. So I think that desire for increased vocational technical education is in the college's favour, and I think that is recognised by businesses. What we need to do is join up the government funding element and the government investment element into that now, because I think businesses and employers have been very, very clear what they need. I think colleges are being very clear about what they can provide and what their USP in this system is, and we just need that investment to be joined up by government to make sure that colleges are providing the skills that are required for increase in offshore wind or other renewable energy technologies or defence sector or health and social care, because all of these things are going to be booming in years to come.
Mm-hmm. And Angela, I guess then that when you make that case, which seems pretty incontrovertible to me, the basis for continued reasonable funding is made for you, actually, isn't it?
It absolutely is, but we need to look at the system, so if there is no more money within the system, we need to look at where money is wasted and there's duplication, and it is at those transition points, so we have huge volumes of our senior fees provision being double funded, and we've got elements of our HNC, HND provision in colleges being duplicated, because when people go on to university, they've been asked to repeat years. And then there's also an argument about why is a degree 4 years in Scotland rather than 3 years elsewhere in the UK. So I think it's important we don't get into an argument about them and us. And for me, it's about levelling up rather than levelling down in terms of that funding allocation. But if we need to look at a leaner, more agile system that is truly responsive to communities and employer needs, then we really need to look at everything in the round.
So obviously we're talking really about parity of esteem here, a phrase that has been used in this conversation, I think, as long as I've been aware of it. And you mentioned, Gavin, that Ben Macpherson announced this examination of the structure and funding of our universities. Is there any indication that colleges will be part of that conversation and examination? Because as we're talking about, a lot of students will go to college and then on to university, and you mentioned, Angela, they're often repeating work that they've already done and whatever. And if we are going to have a more integrated, more flexible relationship between the two parts of tertiary education, then you would feel that an examination of one should also be involving the other as decisions are made about the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, as Angela's pointed out, actually just across colleges and universities alone probably doesn't give you all the information you need. Is at senior phase of school, colleges and universities holistically, because there is a lot of duplication, there's a lot of waste in the system that I think if you took a proper strategic approach to it, you could iron some of that out. Obviously, the universities and Scottish Government have already had their discussions and they're kind of already out publicly. We are having those similar discussions behind the scenes with government ministers and officials. And I imagine we will be in a position to speak more about that in kind of February, March time. But we are certainly involved and will have some form of role in the university side as well, which I'm imagining will be reciprocal on the colleges side.
Okay. The other thing we're talking a lot about, and this has been touched on these days, is regional economies. We're all getting very interested in, not thinking of Scotland as one economy, but thinking of it as a collection of regional economies, all of which have different strengths and weaknesses, and whether we have the correct political structures in place, for example, to allow those regions and communities to make the decisions and address the problems that they understand better, certainly, than the man or woman in Edinburgh. So we talked a bit about colleges being anchors in communities. What role can they play in reviving and stimulating those regional economies? To either of you, really, that one.
I'll come in first. Yeah. So, I mean, I think colleges already do that. You know, you go to colleges, we are part of our community planning network, we're part of our regional economic partnerships. Quite often colleges take a leading role in terms of skills development. I think the challenge is none of that is formalised, and we're perhaps not given credit for the role that we already play within our regions. It is a very, very complex setup. So I'm talking about Ayrshire in terms of the legislative requirements of councils and how that plays into regional economic partnerships, and then how colleges and universities fit within all of that. So colleges are well placed to take even more of a significant role in terms of skills-led regions, is the phrase that we would coin. But there has to be work done around that. And I guess one of the frustrating things about the Withers Review, which the college sector overwhelmingly signed up to, is we always said that it wouldn't work unless it was adopted in its totality rather than picking off individual parts of it. And that's the fear, that we're going to end up with a half-baked model moving forward, because there is some elements of that that could just quite easily sit in the too hard to do box.
Yeah. Which elements would those be, Angela, just before Gavin comes in?
Well, I mean, some of it's already changed around taking lead on skills planning, and a colleges first approach, and that doesn't mean it's only colleges, but a college first approach in terms of designing learning and delivery. Just the new sort of tertiary review legislation that's coming through will limit colleges to realise that potential.
Yeah, I mean, just on your point about regional economies and regional economic partnerships, I think that is the way forward, and I think all the political parties that we're engaging with in advance of the election are moving to that approach as well. And from what we see on the ground with colleges, I think that is the right approach, because if you're in Ayrshire and you've got 90% of the aerospace engineers in your area, there's a very clear economic driver there. Likewise, if you're in Aberdeen and the surrounding areas and you've got a massive amount of oil and gas and the transition to the renewable energy economy in that neck of the woods, there's very, very clear different economic drivers in these regions. So looking at it through that regional lens and having colleges at the heart of a skills-led approach, where they are the driving force of these regional economic partnerships in terms of upskilling and reskilling the local regional workforce, I think is a bit of a no-brainer as we go forward.
Yeah, and that maybe brings me on to sort of the idea of what the college of the future is going to look like as we go through these conversations and processes. And the colleges, I think, are being taken more seriously and by politicians and policymakers now, because they have to. You mentioned shorter, sharper courses, Gavin, micro courses, individual learning accounts fitting in with the workplace. Could you just maybe talk a bit about that, about how colleges adapt to that and what they can offer?
Yeah, and I think Angela's already touched on this, that we're going with the flow of what our customers essentially want, what the learners want. There's an increasing uptick in the amount of vocational qualifications an SQA level, so both in school and at college, because I think people do want to earn and learn at the same time. They want to have workplace-based learning. Now, that could be apprenticeships, modern apprenticeships, or other forms. But I think you're increasingly seeing the attractiveness of people to do that. So whether there is a replacement for the individual learning accounts or something around that, I think would be very positive. Likewise, replacement for the Flexible Workforce Development Fund, which was incredibly successful, was very well regarded, highly regarded by the government in their own impact assessments, but also from businesses. who feel that that was something that they were getting back from the apprenticeship levy that they were paying into. So I think that kind of workplace, work-based learning is something that colleges will definitely need to adapt towards. And the shorter, sharper courses, again, we're already seeing that people are tending to want to do more part-time courses and full-time courses. But colleges are, flexible institutions that are built to adapt to, the employer need and the need of the learner. And they've been doing that already. So it's just a bit of progressing down the same path.
Angela, anything you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you take a step back, we've created a system where funding, a fixed amount of funding goes into different institutions across the tertiary sector to deliver a very prescribed model of delivery. And if you take that back and think about, well, what is it the learner needs? And the funding follows the learner. And that allows a system that is much more agile and responsive, and creates better value for money. Because if the funding followed the learner, there wouldn't be so much duplication. They would probably accelerate through their necessary training. But what that also requires is a level of flexibility in the current regulatory constraints that colleges are under in terms of how we design learning programs and delivering learning programs. And it goes back to my original point about measuring the value of colleges based on our outcomes and our impact, rather than counting the widgets and how many inputs we've had. That for me would create a system which would drive more innovation and efficiency, would drive us to respond to the needs of our economy and students far better, and also mean that there would be greater value for money, and more people would be in the workplace far more quickly.
I'm just going to come on to questions from the audience in a sec, but first, we do have an election coming up. The parties are scribbling away at their manifestos, making all sorts of promises that they may or may not keep. What would you like to see in manifestos from a college perspective?
Yeah, so at a broad level, I think all the political parties would like to see having a pro-college message in their manifestos, really talking up the opportunities that people get when they come to colleges and the effect on both the kind of workforce needs, but also as valuable community anchors in their own institutions. I think we'd want to see them recognised for all the anti-poverty work that they do, all the wraparound care that Angela's talked about that is often not funded or not funded properly, but also the work that they can and should be doing more of in terms of the regional economic partnerships and really building the skills base of the large and small companies. But all that is underpinned by sustainable funding. So we have to have a fundamental review of the funding system in Scotland, and that may or may not be part of these larger transformation discussions with the Scottish Government. And we need to see parity of esteem, because as Angela said, if the funding was to follow the student rather than the institution, you would have a system that naturally sorted itself to the most cost-effective means of delivery, and that is what colleges are.
Angela, anything to add?
No, it's about that sustainable funding and flexibility to allow us to respond.
Well, let's get some questions from the audience then. The first one was from Keith McDonald. Keith, are you with us? Do you want to ask your question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
I've asked several questions. I'm not quite sure which one.
I was just working my way from the top, but you choose which one you'd like to ask. If
well,
like.
It was interesting in just moving away from the discussion we've had. Angela mentioned something. She's talked a lot about extra flexibility. And she seemed to me to be suggesting, and I'm not clear about this, that really the funding and the control should rest with the students, effectively, with the young adults. Have I interpreted that correctly? That perhaps the idea, for example, is that every young adult would get a fund, probably means tested, that they could spend on tertiary education. Is that something you were thinking of? Have I interpreted that correctly?
So potentially, however, there is models elsewhere in the UK where institutes are funded dependent on their enrolments, with much clearer guidelines around priorities. So if you are aged 16 to 19 in England, and you decide to enrol at a college, you are guaranteed a place, and that college is funded to the tune of £9,000 a year. In Scotland, currently colleges get about 5,500 per student a year. And last year in Ayrshire, we probably turned away about 2,500 students.
Basically, because
with a single college region.
Basically, because
yeah,
because you couldn't afford to teach them. We're more than enough.
Yeah, we're capped. You know, we're given a prescribed amount of funding that was prescribed, I think, in 2010, and then because of the 20% reduction in funding over the years, a few years ago, colleges reduced their delivery allocation by another 10% in order to pay the bills when utilities were at their height. So all we've done is closed off opportunity to the people who wanted to access learning in our communities. But there has to be, so I recognise we can't be all things to all people. And this goes back to the system. You know, Scottish Government or our regional economies have to be able to prioritise what is important for that region, or national priorities. And then colleges are able to respond to that. And it works perfectly well in other parts of the UK, but we just have never managed to build in that agility within the Scottish sector.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, thank you. Now, Enterprise Ian, I can see, has been active on the comments as well. Ian, I'd be interested in just hearing from you about your thoughts as to what we've heard today. You've obviously got a real interest in regional economies and the role that colleges can play in building economic growth, etc.
Colleges are crucial to local economic well-being. And there's two things that I would say. One, from a personal perspective, my wife, who was a lecturer, whose quite emotional moment was a former student on the subway leaning forward and saying, "You helped me really understand reading and comprehension, and it's changed my life and it's changed my career." And she came back and wept after that. The second bit is I'm dealing with young entrepreneurs a lot. So many are coming from the colleges. They don't feature on the radar. It's all scale-ups, tech, and university. So what really intrigues me, and this is, bear with me on this, because you've had your heads in the trenches down, holding things together for years now. But as I listened to the discussion, what really worried me, it was so technical. It was technocratic. Education is about passion. And colleges are not selling themselves. They probably not have the ability, the time, or the money to sell themselves. But none of the things that you've been talking about will come to fore unless we start winning over hearts and minds out there in the public. And then when the public do that, they are, after all, voters. That has an impact on politicians. I have no idea why student entrepreneurs from colleges are regarded as second or third class citizens in terms of the enterprise ecosystem. Bridge to Business was a fantastic project which was defunded. You're now left with that, and there's still amazing stuff going on in the colleges. And new business creation is the lifeblood of a local economy. We're not even talking about these things. The whole debate needs to change. So kind of two things to this for both of you is, and it sounds accusatory, but it's far from that. Why have you not sold yourselves as colleges and the things, not general stuff, but those very specific making the cases, which universities are brilliant at? And the second thing is it now time to set the work of the colleges within a regional economic framework and all the benefits that you bring?
For that, Ian.
So
yeah, Gavin or Angela. Yep.
I'll start, and then Gavin can pick up the difficult bits. So I'm going to start with your last comment first. Yes, embed ourselves within regional economies. Absolutely, I think that is the future and the way forward. But sometimes people don't recognise the value and importance of colleges and understand what we can bring. Now, that sounds like we're feeling very sorry for ourselves, and we're not, because we do that. But what we don't have, because of systematic years of cuts in funding, is an army of people sitting in an office being able to develop an evidence base and research and think pieces. And, most colleges, their marketing and comms department is one man and a dog. Because you make a decision about, do you cut it from frontline funding, teaching and learning and delivery, or do you cut your back offices? And that's what colleges have done over the years. We've stripped all of that out. In terms of the enterprise and innovation piece, I think you're absolutely right. And, most business start-up and entrepreneurs will come from the trade. So they'll become your self-employed building company, your self-employed hairdresser. I mean, there's so much that comes from colleges, but the flexibility, and this goes back to allowing colleges to design their learning depending on what individuals in their community needs, is so prescribed. We've got to fit within a framework in terms of awarding bodies. We're not universities. We can't award our own qualifications. And again, as those different pots of money have been removed from us around enterprise and innovation, we have not had the capacity to do as much as we would like. But even within colleges, there is a massive amount of innovation and enterprise. We've had to be like that in order to survive. But the recent reports that have come out from different offers over the years have focused very much on the university sector, not the college sector. However, I'm pleased to say that is now starting to change, and there are a number of colleges that have entrepreneurs in residence, and we're tapping into innovation funding through Interface, but we do it in a small way because we don't have the capacity to put together a department to be really, I guess, proactive and prioritise that type of activity. Yeah. And I'll let Gavin come in before the hard stuff.
No, I mean, you've touched on most of the things I was going to say there, Angela. The communications, marketing, business development roles have unfortunately been the first ones to go when colleges have had to look at the hard decisions around headcount reduction. And that means even national campaigns like the Love Scotland's College campaign, which is put together with colleges through our sister body College Development Network, even that, is run on a shoestring on an annual basis. In terms of the entrepreneurship, Angela's already touched on the entrepreneur in residence, which was a success for us as a sector to get into that element. And I know a lot of colleges are benefiting from having those entrepreneurs on residence already. But also, last time Colleges Scotland ran an annual conference, we did focus on one of the huge, big success stories, not just in the college sector, but of Scottish business in general. That's Jamie Genevieve, who is a college graduate and has now got a multi-million pounds, probably tens and if not hundreds of millions of pounds business based on the kind of makeup artistry skills that she got at colleges. And as Angela's already touched on, and we often, I can be as guilty as this as everyone else, focus on the kind of STEM and the science and technology elements. All the courses that colleges do, whether it's hairdressing or nail technicians, they are often young female entrepreneurs that allows them to start a business themselves. So there's a massive amount of entrepreneurialism, but you're absolutely right, Ian. We haven't been able to shout about it because the resources haven't quite been there.
Okay, Joe Little, you had a question on reskilling. I wonder if you'd ask that. Are you there, Joe?
You'd think someone would actually find where the audio button was so quickly. Yeah, so I've been listening to all this, and well done, Gavin and the team, for getting something at the Scottish Government. But as we discussed last year, the whole sector's falling behind, and we're shackled in so many different ways in finding our own funding and being able to commercialise and to innovate and to transform. Maybe some of those shackles can be removed along the way. But we're also falling behind globally. Globally, other college sectors are gearing up for learners who are going into 2-3 careers throughout their lifetime because they're getting older and their pensions are no longer as secure as they used to be. So Scotland, in college Scotland, and certainly in the college sector, you should be ideally placed to provide those skills. And yet, is there nothing in the pot now to actually recognise that the world's changing and you should be providing that?
Who would like to take that?
Happy to start on that one. No, you're absolutely right, Joe. And for those who haven't already read it, Joe did a very important report last year into what a world-class vocational technical education system looks like globally and how that could be applied to Scotland. And it very much aligns the economic and education and skills portfolios of government, so they're kind of working as one rather than working in this siloed way. But you're absolutely right again about the needs, the increasing needs of the adult population to upskill and reskill. I think probably those in government would admit that there's been a bit of a focus and a drive to try and get colleges to look at to young people, whether that's development in the young workforce or the young person's guarantee. But actually, as we look at all the different interventions that are going to happen and disruption that's going to take place across people's working lives, there's going to be an increasing need for adults to upskill and reskill. And I think, again, it wasn't in this year's budget, but some kind of replacement for the independent learning accounts that provides the ability for people that are already in work to upskill and reskill to get either a better job or a slightly different job, or they've been disrupted by technology and need to find a different way. So I think I very much see again that being in the college's USP to really have that developed offering for adult learners.
So if I just add to that, so 41% of all enrolments in colleges are adults over the age of 25. And the World Economic Forum estimates over the next 5 years that 50% of people in the workplace will have to upskill or reskill because of the adoption of new technologies, but also to develop those higher level meta skills around data analytics and problem solving, and as technology becomes more to the fore in terms of everything we do. So again, going back to the earlier point, creating flexibility within the system that enables colleges to respond to that in an agile and cost-efficient way, so that you're giving people the skills they need rather than here's a prescribed qualification off the shelf, is what the sector needs, so that we are able to respond in a way that works for the population and industry. And I think there's been no recognition in terms of how we're funded and how the sector is set up to the changes in expectations that are coming from industry and our potential students and current students, people want to access learning in a different sort of way. And that's not to say that classroom-based provision isn't really important. It is. And some people will continue to come to college for a long time. But increasingly, people want to access the bits of learning that they need as and when they need it, in a time and a place that suits them. And our whole system is not geared up for that at the moment. And that's what I mean about the need to invest in that transformation.
Okay, I just one question that we haven't touched on yet. The Tertiary Education Bill, which passed recently, and I understand that puts the Scottish Funding Council in charge of apprenticeships rather than Skills Development Scotland, who previously had that responsibility. What difference is that likely to make? What's the thinking behind that? And can you talk a bit about apprenticeships and the importance? You know, we're all talking about them again a lot more than we have been for a while, and the value, we can see the value in them very clearly. But the role in colleges in providing those apprenticeships and how important they are for colleges and the output that comes with it. So Gavin, maybe could you talk about the change from Skills Development Scotland to the Funding Council?
Yeah, so as a sector, we were broadly supportive of the Tertiary Education Bill now to become an act, in the provisions of bringing together the powers of STS over apprenticeships and the existing powers of SFC on colleges and universities, so that it was all housed in one place, and that you could look at one organisation could look across multiple streams of funding, because you need to always remember colleges don't just do further education, they do apprenticeships, further education and also higher education. So that streamlining of the system was a Withers recommendation that we were glad to take into the Act. You know, the Act itself will bring that together, but you know, it's all the things that go around that to make sure that it is now going to be a success that'll be really important. So making sure that colleges are at the heart of it. There is a colleges first and a colleges and universities first approach, which again was another Withers recommendation, so that we keep the public pound within the public sector and we get the best value for money, is going to be crucially important. And also it's going to be challenging. You know, the SFC's tradition hasn't had that role with apprenticeships, so there's going to be a lot of learning there as well. And the National Skills Planning sat with Scottish Government, and to a certain extent STS now is going to be a new model that we have to get our heads around. So there's going to be a lot to that. On apprenticeships, I'll let Angela say more on that, but what I would say is obviously again that number didn't increase in this budget. There was a lot of calls for that to go up from the modern apprenticeship numbers of 25,000 a year. And I think there is a lot of valuable economic arguments around that, especially in your engineering apprenticeships, for example. So I think we will be pushing as a sector, and I'm sure a lot of political parties will be looking at this already, as how can we increase that apprenticeship number, but vitally not just the top line number, but actually fund the apprenticeship system in a more sustainable way as well, because the amount of money that goes into the different apprenticeship frameworks has also been static for about a decade now, and it means that it's just not covering the costs of colleges and delivering these expensive apprenticeships in areas like engineering.
So I think overall it's a good thing to have a single funding body that looks at all delivery within that tertiary sector. I think we spent a lot of time focusing on apprenticeships, which actually I think is less than 10% of the entire skills and education funding budget. So how that might work out is that in areas where apprenticeships need to grow, you would hope that there would be flexibility within that overall budget to allow those apprenticeship frameworks to grow. But over time, I think the important thing for me is that we move away from binary frameworks where you've got to be one or the other. So, you know, there are lots of situations in colleges right across the country where you may have a young person or an adult on a college framework, and they've got the right level of skills and the opportunity exists for them to step into an apprenticeship place within industry, so that they're starting to contribute to, the economy. But either we find that, because again, frameworks are prescribed, we've had our contracts rolled over for the last few years, and we're being told that the contracts will continue to be rolled over for the next few years, that we're not able to offer that apprenticeship place or framework to the employer that we're working with. But also, quite often, that individual has to repeat learning. And then the other thing is that is seen as a failure within the college system, that you're able to lift someone out of the classroom and get them into a workplace, but if they leave before the end of their programme of study, it's considered a failure rather than a success. So those are some of the opportunities. I would hope that becoming a single funding institution, we lose some of those binary constraints and regulatory constraints that don't make any sense, going back to what's best for the learner.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Angela. That's us out of time now. So it's been such a fascinating conversation, and Angela, you used the word opportunity there, and I think what's come across, we did an event maybe 2 years ago when things were looking pretty grim then, and there wasn't a lot of optimism around. I think today we can see that, partly because of the budget, but also the thinking, the hard thinking that's been done, the hard decisions that have been taken, and the essential need for our colleges to be at the heart of our economy and our communities. You can see that there is an uptick in interest and support and optimism around the sector. So hopefully we'll do this again next year, and the budget will have been delivered, and it won't prove to be a one-off, and we'll have even more good news to share. But thank you to Angela and Gavin for giving us your time and the benefits of your wisdom today. And thanks to everyone in the audience for joining us. And we shall see you all soon.